Hey everyone, this is Luke Thomas over at Friday, and welcome to Remote Rants episode number 2, where I just find interesting content online as it pertains to remote work, and we quickly talk about it in the hopes that maybe you learn something or maybe I learn something. So yeah, I recently came across this fun tweet from Hiten Shah on Zoom fatigue. Here's a shocker: remote work does not require video. Which, as you can imagine, with everybody working from home and with Zoom growing like a weed, this is a bit of a contrarian take. So let's kind of break things down and talk about it a little bit more. So Andrew mentions, I find video calls 2 to 3 times more tiring than audio. And Ryan says, listening is hard, video forces focus. An interesting kind of how I think about this is that when and this is part of the reason why people always say, hey, please turn on your video, is because that creates and forces some sense of accountability, right? And which takes work, right? So if I'm on a phone call, I could literally be laying in bed talking to someone. Whereas if I'm on video, it creates this kind of social pressure or these social expectations to act and behave presentable, even if you're bored out of your mind. Kate weighs in, remote work does not require synchronous communication. Vinay responds, I think the ratio of synchronous versus asynchronous changes in remote. Synchronous, video and in person, is still needed or at least improves performance. This is a really great point. Here's how I would encourage you to think about synchronous versus asynchronous, which I weighed in with a comment, is that there is too much of one thing can be a bad thing. And so if you are only working asynchronously when you are remote, you may be missing out on some of the benefits of asynchronous or real-time conversation. And so here's how I think about this, and I'll talk about this in a bit more in the future. Asynchronous is great for sharing low ambiguity facts and information, like data and metrics. And when synchronous, it's great for building social connections, right? Improving your relationships, bonding, and collaborating around a topic with some ambiguity, right? Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to establish some sense of common ground. And when you do this over writing, it's actually quite difficult. It just takes longer. And while writing can help you structure those synchronous or those real-time conversations, real-time presents a richer environment, right? Because there's a faster feedback loop. You're processing tone, body language, and other information that can help you come to some sense of common ground a bit faster. It also just helps you, build better relationships when working remotely as well. So I would encourage you to think about asynchronous versus synchronous as like these are two different tools for two different jobs. And Susan in this thread drops the bomb. Is it Zoom or is it that unnecessary meetings are still happening? I use my video most of the time, but I will admit I'm choosy about when to have a meeting in the first place. Great job, Susan. This is really the key nugget here. With so many people spending so much time in meetings when working remotely, and I've talked about this with other people in the past, you are trying to replicate the office online. Whereas what you maybe should be thinking about is how can you kind of totally change the game here and map the right tool or the right process to the right task at hand, right? And so essentially how I think about this is save your meetings for when they are most important, right? And if you're just sharing information in a meeting, maybe you don't need to have the meeting. Maybe it could be an email, right? People talk about this all the time. There's literally coffee mugs online that talk about, I survived a meeting that could have been an email, right? This is stuff that happens both in the office and also remote. But when you're remote, it really extrapolates the pain. Because when you're talking in Zoom, or when you're talking on a video call, there's some latency, which means that you have to work harder, right? Imagine like people interrupting each other. Like that's not as fun. And while people interrupt others in person, there's more latency when you are communicating over the internets. So let's keep going. Remote work does not require being on a call at all times. That's called micromanagement. Yes, true. Let's keep going. Depends. I teach remotely, and when students enable their video, they have much higher interactions, right? This gets back to the point around accountability. And it also, in this context, teaching, right, involves kind of there's this need for rich discussion. And like I talked about earlier, if you're trying to establish some sense of common ground, you need a fast feedback loop to accommodate that. And teaching, for example, is one of those scenarios where synchronous can be more helpful. 18 years in and less than 5 video calls in all those years. Email is best as you can provide data, metadata. Email is time zone agnostic and allows out-of-order replies. Slack, time sync. This is kind of hardcore asynchronous, but you can see here that that there is a benefit to asynchronous communication, right? You can kind of be more thoughtful. You can provide this metadata, as this Stephen indicates, right? That's a good point. It may be going a little bit too far if you're only having 5 video calls, but to each their own. Let's keep going. I think there's one more comment that I wanted to get to. Okay, let's rip through this one. Plenty of times that a phone call works just fine. I started off doing more video meetings, but cut way back. Not enough flexibility. I don't want to sit in a chair for hours. I like walking meetings and going outside. Don't want to deal with keeping a camera on my face. This is a great comment. And so this is a wonderful comment, especially this quote right here. Not enough flexibility. I don't want to sit in a chair for hours. Once again, I would argue, the flexibility piece is the nugget of what makes remote work wonderful, is that I can wake up at 5 a.m. and start working if I want to, whereas a coworker can wake up and start working at 10 a.m. if they want to. Remote work at its core is about flexibility. And this really kind of digests or tries to unpack that a bit more. And so, yeah, this is kind of a quick overview. Here's, once again, how I would, as a recap, right? Remote work does not require video. I think it can require a lot less video, but once again, it's about mapping the right communication channel to the task at hand. And if you can do that, probably, I would argue, maybe 80% of your time will be communicating asynchronously, and you'll save those meetings for building better relationships or for trying to collaborate and resolve very ambiguous tasks. So I hope this was useful, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks.